Hey everyone and welcome to a new video. So Zarek the Silent King is finally making his presence felt in Warhammer 40k, and I, like many of you, am incredibly excited to see how this is going to shape the direction and story of the game going forward. But the Silent King is a character that has been in the background for some time now. We got a nice teaser article on him in White Dwarf at the start of the year, which sparked a lot of conversation about his impending return, and yet he's mentioned quite a few times in the Necron Codex, which has already announced his return to the galaxy and his mission to awaken the Necron race fully before the Tyranids overthrow the galaxy. So to finally have this video announcing his return is incredibly exciting, because it not only brings that speculation to an end, but it also suggests a new storyline that transcends the upcoming Pariah book. This new arrival doesn't really seem to be part of that Psychic Awakening series, so it's likely that the Silent King is also ushering in the next chapter in Warhammer 40k, just as Chaos's conquering of Cadia did so before. And as I mentioned in a previous video, I genuinely do believe that a revised version of 40k could be part of that new chapter. But in any case, I wanted to use the time in this video to go through the trailer and pick out some elements that really stood out to me, and which left me thinking that this is, funny enough, just the start of something far bigger, not just for the Necrons, but the galaxy at large. So let's start at the beginning, and straight out the gates we get a really nice depiction of the Silent King at the pinnacle of his power. For those who aren't aware, the Necrons existed as a rather sickly humanoid race billions of years before humanity took root on Terra, and to avert their fractious empire falling apart, Zarek entered into a pact with the ancient Catan to give them immortality and a sense of unity. This unfortunately came at the cost of their flesh, which was replaced with living metal in a process called biotransference. And in this opening image, it seems that the Silent King has already gone through this process, and he's joined either side by two other Necrons. I believe that these are the other members of the Triarch, a council of 3 Pharaons who governed over the leaders of the individual Necrontyr dynasties. In addition, he's called the Silent King because he only ever addressed his subjects through these other 2 Pharaons, and we can see that in action here. The Silent King is sitting comfortably in his throne, flanked either side by the other members of the Triarch, and citizens of the Necrontyr have come to either worship him or seek his guidance, and we'll see what he offers them in just a moment. However, before we move on, we can see that there's a deep gouge in the rock, I think it's rock at least, where the Silent King's neck piece is, and where he's likely to display the centrepiece of his heraldry in a similar way to a Usek collar worn by ancient Egyptians. Now, on one level, I think GW is trying to hide this heraldry from us. Perhaps it reveals some plot point or a link to another character that they don't want to announce just yet. But I'm keen to consider that we see this scarring happen on multiple occasions with the Silent King's neckpiece. And if we consider that the Usek collars in ancient Egypt were used to depict members of the elite class, maybe this is where we start to get a glimpse of one of the more interesting plot threads behind the character, that members of the Necron race might even resent him for his role and his place at the top of their society. Given what happened under his rule and the responsibility and power that comes with it, maybe we can infer that some members of the Necron dynasties who have been able to work their own agendas in Zarek's absence might prefer he didn't come back at all. It's one interpretation, but I'll come back to this apparent act of vandalism in just a moment, because I think it actually links nicely with the narrator we hear in the video, and it reveals a bit more about who this voice might be. Anyhow, let's move on and look at the next depiction, which sees these citizens of the Necrontyr bowing behind their king as he points to a distant star. Now, this symbol that sits above the crowd, I've tried to look high and low as to what this means, and I can't find anything concrete. There's a glimpse of it in the 8th edition Necron Codex and another reference in an earlier version, but nothing that indicates a role or dynasty, and it's left me thinking that it's just meant to denote common Necrons as we witness their transformation under the Silent King's bargain. And we see that bargain take shape as he again points to this star which is shining beams of light down from the heavens. Now, this very much seems to depict the moment the bargain with the Catan was struck. They are, after all, known as the Star Gods, so it would make sense for them to be depicted as stars themselves, which carries a lot of reverence and implied power in that image. Coincidentally, it was also the star of the Necrontyr's homeworld that debilitated their bodies and made their lifespan so precariously short, so it might be that this moment also reflects on how the Silent King's decision, in a way, saved them from that fate, but I'm less sure of that one. What I am drawn to, though, is this carving on the star itself. Some have said it looks like a person or a gateway, however I think it's a face, and actually of one very important in Necron lore. If this is in fact the Silent King conversing with the Catan as the bargain to save his people is made, which the audio also implies, then I feel that this face is one of the Catan itself, and the one it seems to resemble most is Nephoron, the Spiral Flame. In particular, I feel this star is quite reminiscent of Nephoron's mask with its rather unique mouth opening, and the hollow circle on his forehead, which is used throughout the trailer to denote the faces of the Necron tier, gives a sense of kinship with the Necrons. Whoever this being is, it's something linked to the Necrons and their society, and a star god like Nephorin fits quite nicely. Now, two things jump to mind. Firstly, the Deceiver was the Catan who actually met the Silent King to offer their bargain of immortality, not Nephorin, so it seems to be a mistelling of history. However, we'll see later on how this narrator isn't necessarily presenting an accurate picture of the Silent King, so I'm open to the idea of the carving presenting a different truth of sorts. But perhaps more importantly, I wonder if this is a subtle Easter egg from Games Workshop. It could be more accurate to have a symbol depicting the Deceiver on the star, but we have a model for the Deceiver. We don't yet have one for Nephorin, who even appears in the latest Necron Codex in the section about Catan shards, but without any rules himself. This is where I start to think that the Silent King might only be the beginning of a far bigger swathe of Necron releases, and a new Catan would certainly be an exciting one to be sure. But let's move on. We see the Necron tier citizens who are wasting away in their living biological bodies, undergoing the biotransference process that made them into the Necrons we know today. We also see the gouged neckpiece of the Silent King, which again really does seem too coincidental not to be deliberate. And we see the Triarchs have been replaced with these shields. Now, this is where it gets a little bit shaky. These could be artistic references for the other two Triarchs who were around at this point, but we also see these shields later at a time when they were very much dead as a result of the war in heaven. So it begs the question of whether these are symbolic references for the broader Triarch Council, or whether the Silent King replaced them after the war. I'm feeling it's more the former, but it could be that the Silent King just has really cool floating shields to protect him, so it's anyone's guess, but I thought I ought to mention the shift there. But this section of the video has arguably drawn the most attention thanks to the muscular Necron depictions we see, and there's been a fair few theories that Necron warriors are getting the Primaris treatment, that Pariahs have been at the protein shakes, and everything else you can imagine. However, I personally feel this is just an imaginative representation of how the Necrons here were gifted with far more powerful and resilient forms by the Silent King. Given how willing the narrator is to heap praise on him, it makes sense that the imagery is also quite flattering, and I sense this is just how some wish the Necrons to view their transformation. Far from being cursed with their living metal bodies, which is really how it is, the trailer's narrator and the carving try to present it as a transcendent transformation, something to be in awe of. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see why a particular class of Necron would be called out here when it was in fact all Necrons here who underwent a transformation at this point in the timeline. We also see the arms, waists and legs of these newly birthed Necrons begin to glow bright green, the first time this happens in the trailer, which gives a sense of their awakening as the harbingers of death that we know today. In addition, at the same time, the chest of the Silent King and the orbs surrounding him also spark into life, and I think this depicts his activation of the command protocols which granted Zarek complete control of his subjects. In addition, the way these arms, waists and leg bands begin to glow also presents an image of enslavement. They're almost manacles as much as they are cultural dressing, and it hints at the dual nature of the Necron's transformation, a liberation from death, but simultaneously an eternal enslavement to the Silent King. Interestingly, the narrator also goes quite quiet at this point. He's keen to reflect on the gift of biotransference freeing the Necrons here from death, and only speaks again to mark how they were gifted the opportunity for revenge. He doesn't comment on the command protocols, which again builds this sense of a tailored truth which glosses over history. It's a really nice touch, and it shows how well this trailer has been crafted to both reveal and conceal at the same time. But as the scene pans over the apparent legions of Necrons at Zarek's disposal, we hear that they were indeed granted revenge, a rather sinister reference I feel to the betrayal of the Catan after the war in heaven. In the Necron Codex, it's quite clear that Zarek regretted his decision to deal with them and the doom that they had wrought in his name. So when they had the opportunity, he and the Necrons destroyed them, breaking them into the shards they now use today. It's interesting how the narrator suggests that this was the Necrons' revenge granted by the Silent King, and not simply his own. There's a great reference in the 8th edition Codex that reveals that Zarek was afraid to release the command protocols before the Catan were vanquished, in case the Necrons turned on him. So it's hard to say that the Necrons had much choice or personal stake in the revenge. Again, another brushing over of history. And funny enough, we find what I feel was the most damning evidence of the narrator's bias. I say this jokingly because it's quite deliberate from Games Workshop and I absolutely love it. It's quite reminiscent of Black Library's motto that everything is canon but not everything is truthful, and I hope we see more of this in future videos. But we're presented with the Silent King's departure, which by the way happened after both the war in heaven and the subsequent conflict with the Catan had exhausted the Necrons, forcing them to enter a galactic-wide slumber lest the Eldar, who had fought alongside the old gods, find them and exterminate them for good. And the narrator says that in his wisdom he sailed into the lightless void. Now, That's simply not true. Zarek was overcome with guilt for his role in the damnation of his race, and he sought solace and penance out in the void. That's what the Codex clearly states. So the narrator is clearly trying to present a glamorized version of the Silent King. It's not Games Workshop retconning anything, that would be ridiculous, but we are getting an alternate retelling of events. And that leads me to believe that our narrator is one of the Triarch Praetorians. We know, again from the Codex, that the Praetorians hold responsibility for maintaining the Triarch's rule over Necron society, and they have been flocking to the Silent King, the last surviving member of the Triarch, to serve as his heralds. Their role is to keep his identity a secret while they spread his message of unity to every tomb world. That's because ultimately Zarek seeks, and has actually always sought, the unity of the Necron race, and the story we see in this trailer is exactly the sort of thing you can imagine one of his messengers saying to the Necron nobility of a distant tomb world. Likewise, the scarring over the Silent King's neckpiece deliberately keeps his identity and dynasty a secret, while the broader message glosses over any of his faults, seen glaringly so in this massive damaged section of the wall that follows this scene. Here we can anticipate the faulty reawakening of the Necrons that saw billions of their race never activate, and how the dynasty splintered in Zarek's absence, seeking their own power and influence. Again, I'm just pointing out what I personally see here, but what I'm trying to get at is that this presentation of the Silent King is not the Silent King as we should see him, it's how he wants to be seen by other Necrons. I also want to reflect on his size quickly because he seems enormous in this image, and it's led to a lot of speculation in the community. I think it's fair to say that whatever his final appearance, he'll have a huge amount of presence on the battlefield, and I wonder if he might mirror someone like Catacross from the Ossiarch Bone Reapers in Age of Sigmar. Not only does his size reflect his power and authority, but the broader scenic base gives him a great presence as a centrepiece. He's a diorama in and of himself, and I'd love to see something similar for Zarek, perhaps with his own Triarch Praetorians close by to protect him and help him command his legions. But let's turn to the final scene of this trailer, where the Necrons are awoken millions of years after Zarek first ordered them to enter their slumber. As the narrator says, the stars themselves have since grown ancient, and frail empires have sprung up across the galaxy. We see the legions marching on some of these empires, who are depicted as woefully inferior in stature and build. Again, I think this is more illustrative to gloss over the fact that most Necrons inhabit bodies that are grotesquely built compared to other, perhaps more elegant races. The humanoids in their path are also aligned in a way that reminds me of that evolution of man diagram, which depicts the various stages of humanity's development. Here, it gives a terrifying sense that the conquering and annihilation of these frail empires is almost an evolutionary process. Just as humanity, for example, grew from its crouched stance to stand tall, so must it evolve back to that stage, and the Necrons are the driving force. It also links nicely to the broader Necron ambition of apotheosis, which will see them evolve and transcend to a far higher form of existence, and this is mentioned on several occasions to be at the forefront of the Silent King's plans. I guess the question is that ambition a zero-sum game? Do all empires need to fall and fade away in order for the Necrons to see their own empire and evolution fully realised? And in the skies above, we see that plan taking shape on a galactic scale. Tomb worlds are seen to glow with awakening amidst an array of planets and stars. If I'm honest, I'm not entirely sure what the two planets on the right represent, but the one in the middle of the tomb worlds reminds me of the claws of the Tyranids. Now, these curved tendrils also appear with the earlier sun, so maybe it simply denotes a star or a threat of some kind, but as I mentioned at the start of the video, we know that the Silent King views the Tyranids as the biggest threat to their empire and their transcendence, and he has really gone out of his way and on several occasions allied with Imperial and Xenos forces in order to take them out. One example is on the world of Uanvos, where Zarek practically saved the Tau from an overwhelming Tyranid swarm, and the other is with the Blood Angels as depicted in the short story The Word of the Silent King. So I wonder if the Tyranid threat is being depicted here, and if this more like symbol on the right is showing the consumption of worlds. I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure here, but maybe you have some ideas. Overall though, we are witnessing the awakening of the Necron race, something that hasn't really happened yet since many of the tomb worlds haven't fully reactivated. The Necrons fighting in Warhammer 40k are just a fraction of their true force, and the Silent King is attempting to not only bring that full force to bear, but to unify under his rule. And we see that illustrated very clearly as the stars and tomb worlds across the galaxy shine with the symbol of the Triarch, of which he, for the moment at least, is the only surviving member. In essence, that symbol is as much his as it was the Council of old, and it's almost as if the galaxy itself is being awoken and shaped to declare his coming. Quite the entrance when you come to think about it. So that's the trailer for The Silent King and a few of my thoughts on what was revealed and hinted at in it. I for one am incredibly excited for the preview event later this month, and I think more than anything, I'm just glad that the next chapter of 40k is going to be shaped by a Xenos race. I think the Imperium and Chaos story, while really great, has clearly run its course for now, and I'm actually looking forward to at least attempting to hold the line while legions of Necrons pour across the galaxy. But what do you think, both about The Silent King's return and this trailer? I think it's really nicely put together with a voiceover that really does offer more questions than answers, and I hope we see more videos take this sort of narrative approach in the future. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you as always for watching. Please do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed it, and I do hope you'll join me for the next one. But until then, do take care.